And we're back. Welcome to the Constitution Line by Line.
Caught me with my coffee. I'm Don Frazier, professor of history at McMurray University.
And I'm Paul Fabrizio, professor of political science at McMurray University. And we're delighted you're joining us as we go through the Constitution line by line.
Yes, we are.
All right.
It's a rich tapestry.
It is. And I'm learning so much through this.
Yeah,
so
me too.
All right. So we're talking Article 1, Section 8, the enumerated powers, Clause 15. Are you ready?
I'm ready. What's our line?
Congress shall have the power, here we go, to provide for calling forth the militia.
My favorite.
To execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrections, and repel invasions. Don Frazier, what's the militia?
All right. So the idea behind the militia goes all the way back to our English roots.
Okay.
And the idea that you could call forth a yeomanry to build an army on the fly is an old English tradition.
Okay.
So, and it actually goes even further back to the idea of the polis within the Greek civilization. And the Romans also understood that citizen soldiers were a thing during the Republic period. So this is not a new concept. The idea that the average citizen should be kept in readiness in order to answer the nation's call to repel invasions and also to suppress rebellions.
Yes, suppress insurrections.
So
they were concerned about that because, of course, they were all insurrectionists
and there
just a couple of years before.
And Shays's rebellion had kind of messed everybody up. They were going, wow, you know, Shays's rebellion popped up, and the national government had really no power to do even influence that situation. So they said this time Congress will be able to call up militias. Now, historically, militias were the purview of the states, a prerogative of the states.
Right.
So these militias would have to be federalized. Now, why militias? We come away from the American Revolution thinking that militias really were an important part of the victory. And in some aspects they were. But as line troops, they were not. You know, one of the great orders issued to militia during the American Revolution was when General Daniel Morgan went to his militia and said, look, just give me 2 volleys, then you can run at the Battle of Cowpens. And the reason being is that he knew that these guys would not stand toe-to-toe with the regulars. And even so, they could give you 2 volleys. They could create a distraction on the battlefield. But one of the lessons that was probably incorrectly learned from the American Revolution was that the militia, these farmers turned soldiers, are what won the fight.
And they didn't.
They didn't. It was when Washington organized the American Army into the Continental Army and gave it the same kind of discipline and training as a European power.
See, I was going to ask you about that because the militia, it seems by definition, don't have the training that would be necessary to win.
Correct. And think about what they're having to be trained to do. Stand in line, use a flintlock, learn how to camp in such a way as you don't spread disease, you know, things like that. Pretty low tech. Can you imagine trying to apply this militia principle to a modern high-tech army?
Yeah.
Ooh, it'd be grim. But the idea that the United States would not have a standing army, it would have an expansible army that would be supplemented by these militia, and then the militia would get federalized as state volunteers for federal service. There's some notable disasters after the adoption of the Constitution when it comes to militia. In fact, the Battle of Queenston Heights in the War of 1812 comes to mind. It was a mixed.
Maybe your mind, not mine. I'm sorry. I don't even know anything about this.
You know, Queenston Heights, and so it was a mixed.
Like in New York.
It's actually across the Niagara River over in Ontario.
Oh, okay.
So it's War of 1812. It's the Niagara frontier. A mixed force of U.S. regulars and New York militia are going to go and invade Canada. So the idea is, well, we'll start with the regulars. They'll establish a beachhead, and then we'll get the militia over as reinforcing troops. Regulars get over there, but the Canadians mostly militia, but also stiffened by British regulars, pounce upon the American regulars and pin them down, tear them up. And the regulars send across the Niagara River. All right, send over the militia. The militia sit down and hold a vote because
they hold
a vote
Whoa.
because their term of service said they were supposed to stay in New York. And so they weren't.
They were in Canada.
That's right. We're supposed to resist invasions, and we're not supposed to conduct invasions. And so they say, no, this is probably unconstitutional. So we're just going to sit on this bank of the Niagara River and watch you guys get pummeled. And that's kind of what happened. So
seriously,
yeah. So militia is sometimes not particularly useful. Largest Indian battle disaster in American history in terms of the number of government forces killed. What do you think it is? Everybody tends to think Little Bighorn. Yeah, it's actually Hamer's defeat in the old Northwest Territories, and there's like 800 militiamen that are slaughtered.
Really?
Oh yeah, by a confederation of Northwestern Indians. I mean, everything from Miamis and Wyandottes and
wow.
Yeah. So the militia idea sounds great on paper, and it's a cost-saving measure to be sure, but that tells you how unserious the United States government is about trying to build a professional military.
For good reason.
Oh yeah.
Don't you think?
Oh yeah. I mean, they're coming in to this conversation scarred.
But is your argument then that the framers of the Constitution, misinterpreted the American Revolution?
I think some of them did. I think we still teach it wrong. When we teach our kindergartners, or second graders, third graders, well, all those guys in the red suit stood out in the green woods, and our Americans were smart and hid behind trees and picked them off, and that's how we won the American Revolution. That's junk. That is just completely incorrect. Junk. It's junk. It is junk history. And so don't keep feeding those kids those sugar tablets. Why don't you teach them that discipline, hard work, and training ultimately
the things that you would expect
is how you end up overcoming your British adversary.
So it wasn't the guerrilla techniques of George Washington.
George Washington didn't conduct guerrilla techniques.
Okay.
And so that's kind of it. But you look at something like Lexington and Concord, it was the embattled farmers that came out and fought the British. Well, they had the British on a long, narrow road, and it was a shooting gallery.
Okay.
And so the British weren't trying to drive the militia away. They were trying to extract some guys that had been cut off.
Okay.
That's a whole different situation. The militia did well at Breed's Hill, sometimes Bunker Hill.
Okay.
Because they were dug in up to their eyeballs, and they had people with regular Army training that did two things. They drove ranging stakes so that the farmers would know when to pull the trigger. When they get past that stick, shoot them.
Oh, okay.
Elsewhere, it comes down to us as don't shoot until you can see the whites of their eyes, which begs the question, what was that officer asked? Hey, Captain, when should I shoot? And so that's the militia.
Okay.
And so I think that we need to reconsider that a bit.
So this provision here, you notice it's third.
Yeah.
First we have the armies.
Army's good.
Navy's
good. Critical.
And then
we'll throw in some militia to kind of give us some bulk. We'll bulk it up.
Okay, and so Congress shall have
Same
the
reason
power
you get
to do
rice
it.
and beans at a Mexican food place.
They
2
always
enchiladas.
They always come with it.
Yeah, because they're trying to bulk it up.
Okay.
And it's cheap.
Okay.
Same idea. The militia is the rice and beans.
Interesting take on it.
Yeah.
Because the militia come up again later.
Ooh.
They come up in the next clause that we're going to take up, and they also come up in the Second Amendment.
Second Amendment, which is highly misunderstood because it's taken out of this sort of militia context.
Okay, something to look forward to.
Yeah.
I can't wait till we get to this.
Yeah, that'll be a rodeo.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's our line.
That is very interesting.
Yeah. So
you're blowing my image of
I
the
like
American
the militia.
Revolution.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So that's our line. We'll pick up the next one next episode.